So this is a bit of a play on a notion that I've been working on for ages now called Trialectics. It's a theory of governance and money. I've been exploring philosophy or philosophical concepts for many years, but I've had a resurgence of certain ideas, and I wanted to re-articulate certain things that have come up as of late. So I've changed my ideas from something called Trialectics to Quadralectics, which I had explored briefly before, but with notions of how I believe perspectives augment and change in a fractal sense, it has given me a new context to hold this idea, I believe. So first we're going to look at what I'm going to try to summarize as the New World Order in about 5 minutes, or the important elements of how the system seems to both originate and impose control mechanisms on society en masse. And then I'm going to look at quadralectics and I show some potential benefits that I think go along with it. So the New World Order is the Old World Order in many regards, and it's an integration, a systemic integration of the major three Platonic expressions or perspectives, but done in a way that vertically integrates and seizes power over the other two in a sense. The New World Order is an inverted totalitarianism. Its corporate forces corrupt the levers of power such that the masses are left essentially powerless and penniless. It's vertically integrated in that the top is overseeing and is exerting its power down onto the other levels. In a certain sense, the mass is at the bottom, and then the government structure, more or less, is in the middle, and then the executors, which are corporate, financial, even philosophical in some ways, are the ones producing the top-down effect. To do that, you have to have a fairly good objective or empirical map of the realities of things. And they have to understand that much of human experience is driven by emotion, so that the appeal to these emotions can have a massive effect in coordinating the movement of beings. And this was developed and expressed quite intelligently through people like Sigmund Freud. Edward Bernays played on that in the corporate sense, and there's many others. This is just that. So what I'm looking at here is the brilliance, in essence, of dividing power, as the Founding Fathers had envisioned it, with the judicial, legislative, and executive branches. Something that, in many regards, we have in you. The judicial, the legislative, and executive are, in many regards, Plato's big three, where, as an individual, you have to react in ways. Now, we have all three, whereas some beings don't. Say a reptile, they only really seem to enact or be involved in the I, fight or flight, sort of the traditional Darwinian expression of reality, whereas mammals seem to have an expression of the we, which we can kind of, in the mental sense, consider legislative. And that means there's a resonance or space for other, in which there's a communion that is enacted when you and I understand each other and we express ideas that are coming from this unique place. As each being has an I that's unique, an artistic expression of their own subjective experience, this we is when two unique beings come into contact and express themselves in that unique way. The it, or executor branch, is that branch that enacts the mind, in a sense, because it is the executor that understands that they are a thinking being that can impose if-thens on reality and direct it in certain ways. But to do a good job of it, they have to have a pretty good landscape or picture of reality. Now, the pathology or the danger is to absolutize any particular perspective. Now, the New World Order has to really know that all three of these are operational. But there can nevertheless be a pathology of the executor where they they place way too much emphasis on the executive branch and or the empirical branch and impose it down on the bottom. And so that is, in essence, what I think is happening in and through the fiat currency. Now, the fiat currency is a decoupled currency from reality. Now, even with a non-fiat currency, I think this could still happen. But it's a lot easier when it is fiat, in that there's no real coupling to reality. So through something for, hypothetical purposes, perhaps, you have the Federal Reserve, and it's a black box of information. We really don't know how much money is being printed and where it's going to. It can't be audited. That's why somebody like Ron Paul says, a primary move we ought to push for is the auditing of the Federal Reserve, which makes a lot of sense because in and through fiat currency, you can manipulate the legislative and the judicial branches. That is to say, top down through the executor, which is just one part of it, potentially, that money system. You're enforcing power down through those, that is creating contours or patterns in the techno-industrial modes so that things follow in the path or the wake of that money. As Rothschild said, I care not who controls the government, it's who controls the money, essentially. It's not the exact quote, but it is true in that, if you're the executor, in a place of executing things through the money system, then it doesn't matter who really has the power, because the money system is the base resource, in that, if you don't have the money, you cannot eat, or very easily eat. That's why there could be that twisted notion that you have a chip, and if you don't follow the rules of that chip, they just turn it off. Whether or not that's true, it has a very real logical turn to it in this kind of dark and twisted sense. So that's how an executor overthrows the division of power through fiat currency, through something like a Federal Reserve, which would be, if it's true, not bound to the governance. So, as a primary goal, auditing the Federal Reserve is highly important to understanding the contours of the reality that we're in. Of important note, 2012 is the 100th year of the Federal Reserve, and their bill comes up due at this year. So I believe that's much of the reason why we have the end of the world scenarios that we see, because that is it's up for auditing, essentially. So now the quadralectic system is both a multiplicity of money systems alongside the multiplicity of governance, adding one new governance structure, the commons, alongside the judicial, legislative, executive, and 4 different systems of money, quote unquote. And I'm using the idea or the sense of money a little bit loosely, because in the same way that these are reflections of interiors and exteriors, that is to say, a tangible or tradable sense of some interior gift or experience that can be used on the exterior side. So that the resource share is an expression, in essence, of the capabilities of an I, in that in the punitive sense, I can do this or I can't do that. If I cross a particular boundary, then I ought to get punished for it. And, an arbitrary boundary perhaps, but an important one to keep the social glue functioning, or the legislative, in that we have to maintain this we. So this is all functioning simultaneously, and I'm adding a new layer atop the old structure so that this is even more complex, unfortunately, but I think it has more safeguards in and through the complexity. So the heart shares, where the resource shares were essentially, or could essentially be something like a resource-backed system where there's a tangible and tradable thing like a gold system, silver, and or other things that are tangible in that sense. And they could have reflections of them, like money, but they have to be regulated far better. And that's, how do you regulate that? How do you really get well, you have to have an economy for that regulation. And the legislative was designed for that, but again, it fell back into the problem of the fiat. Whereas if you have a heart share, that only those people within that system are potentially only can operate within the heart shares transaction system, then you're helping to regulate the legislative branch. The intended purpose for this is the we space, to enhance it. That's the primary purpose, is not to create arbitrary rules and laws. Rather, it's to enhance the meaning space of reality. In a sense, these people would be acting as the philosophers, or the poets, or something like that, where there's the essence of the ideas are expressed, and there's a purposefulness in that, because it's expressing a new complexity of reality, and we communicate it in that way. The executive branch maintains the more or less empirical or objective or behavioristic domains, which has been the kind of control mechanism at present. It's focused in that it has this kind of high degree of scientism involved in it, but not in an absolutistic sense, not in that it dominates or contorts all of reality just to that it space. Rather, it allows the expression, or this complexity of things would allow the flourishing of subjectivity and intersubjectivity of the I space, or judicial, or resource shares, alongside the heart shares, or we shares, or legislative space. Now, the executor part is involved essentially in what we might call mind shares, or understanding the contours at whatever level. Again, it could be at the familial level, the community level, the national level, and or the global level. But it's more the technical issues, so that, if you're going to be enacting something at an executive level, you have to be technically knowledgeable, which isn't the case in our present system. The prime ministers, the presidents, they don't have really, they do, but it's technically there to deceive us in essence. So the executor here is a technical individual, much in the way an engineer is in many regards in the system. The commons, or the vision shares, is an interobjective space where you're dealing with complexities such as, mass species extinction, major global pollution. These are systemic issues of looking at the world as sort of an autopoietic system, a system that's self-organizing, self-creating, chaotic, and self-organizing. And how do you negotiate the complexity of that as sort of a global world changer? So it's, again, this space has much more of a communicative realm, whereas the executor and the judicial realms are far more individuated based. These two, the legislative and the commons, are far more communicatively based. They're far more about how do we create a healthy we, whereas this space is far more about how do we technically negotiate an individuated, autonomous world. Now, this executor, because it's I, was so easily transfixed by the notion of absolute control and top-down mechanisms. It is a pathology of great distort that can and has been found within the it realm, because it's focused on the I far more than the commons and legislative. So it has this kind of, quote unquote, and I use it lightly, feminine element to it, this empathic element at least, whether or not, I use that lightly, but, So the movement, in essence, has to be in and through an understanding the I. So you have to judicate, judicify, I don't know the right word, what is right and wrong within the contours of the self, in a sense. Then you can move to the we, and this is all expanding on a fractal level in many regards. And then you move to the more executive realm, and then finally you can really enact more of a commons. So this is the pattern, and it spirals bigger and bigger and bigger. And how we look at these different share systems is open for debate and open for negotiation, but I think you need to keep these contexts segregated, like you need to separate these different governance structures so that power doesn't corrupt so easily.